5:30 in the morning, July 31st, 2022. Strongsville, Ohio. A passerby found the wreck 45 minutes after it happened. A black Toyota Camry, embedded in the side of a brick building. 3 people were inside. 2 were already dead. The driver was still in her seat. One of her Prada slippers was pressed against the accelerator. When investigators pulled the surveillance footage, the first thing they noticed was not the speed. It was the turn. The car made a smooth, controlled turn onto progress drive before it accelerated. No swerving. No signs of panic. A deliberate line straight into the building. Then they pulled the black box. The accelerator was pressed to 100% capacity. The brakes were never applied. Not once. Not for a single moment in the 5 seconds of pre-crash data the recorder captured. The vehicle had no mechanical defects. The road was clear. The only explanation left was intent. If you are new to Crime Story Network, this channel covers true crime cases through the actual evidence, the court record, and the details that do not make it into the documentary. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every case we cover goes deeper than the headline. Dominic Anthony Russo was born in September 2001, the youngest of 7 children in a Strongsville, Ohio household. His siblings were Angelo, Christopher, Nicole, Christine, Michael, and Frank. His parents, Christine and Frank Russo, later divorced, but Dom grew up surrounded by a large, close family, and by every account he carried that into how he moved through the world. He was not the kind of 20-year-old who was still figuring out what he wanted. He had already started a clothing brand. He was tracking stocks and cryptocurrency on his own, reading the market, making moves. He had a music studio set up at his house, and he shared it with his friends, including Davion Flanagan, where they worked on tracks together in their spare time. His sister Christine described him in a single breath: loyal, caring, funny, and athletic. Not one of those words as a compliment for the sake of it. Each one backed by the way people who knew him consistently talked about him. A few hours before July 31st, 2022, Dom sent his father a text message. 3 words. "Love you, Dad." That was the last message his father ever received from him. Davion Markel Flanagan was born in March 2003. He and his 2 younger sisters, Divine Isabella and Dahlia Rose, spent part of their early childhood in foster care before being adopted at age 8 by Scott and Jamie Flanagan. He grew up in Strongsville, graduated from Strongsville High School in the class of 2022, and had a clear picture in his mind of what came next. He wanted to open his own barbershop. He had the work ethic for it, and the personality to build a clientele. He also played football, and for a time he had his eyes on college and beyond, until a torn ACL took that path off the table. He redirected without complaint. The barbershop dream stayed. The music he made with Dom stayed. The people who loved him have since created a memorial barbershop scholarship fund in his name, which tells you something about how seriously they took the future he was building. Davion had no conflict with Mackenzie Shirilla. He was not part of whatever was happening between her and Dom. On the morning of July 31st, he was a passenger in that car for one reason. He was heading home after a night out with friends. That is the full extent of his connection to what followed. Mackenzie F. Shirilla was 17 years old at the time of the crash. She and Dom had been together for 3 to 4 years, a significant stretch at that age, and at some point during that relationship she had moved into his home and was largely living there. The clearest picture of who she was comes from the people around her. Dom's brother Angelo watched the dynamic between them and described it plainly as consistently unfair to Dom. Christine Russo said the first time she met Mackenzie, something felt wrong immediately. Mackenzie did not say hello. She did not introduce herself. She positioned herself physically between Christine and Dom as if Christine's presence was a challenge that needed to be managed. Multiple people in their wider social circle described the relationship the same way, independently of each other. Dom pulling back, Mackenzie closing the distance. That pattern, described by the people who witnessed it, is where this story actually begins. Prosecutors reviewed approximately 93,000 text messages between Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo as part of their case preparation. Before a single message is read, that number tells you something. It tells you that these 2 people were in near constant contact, that the communication between them was dense and sustained, and that whatever was happening in that relationship was happening in writing, in real time, for years. 93,000 messages is not a relationship. It is a record. The messages that became central to the prosecution's case were not from the night of the crash. They were from the weeks and months before it. In early July 2022, roughly 4 weeks before the morning of July 31st, Dom sent Mackenzie a series of texts that read like someone who had thought carefully about what he wanted to say. The messages were later obtained and reported publicly following the Strongsville police records release in May 2026. In them, Dom wrote that he loved her but did not think they should be together anymore, that there was not much time on Earth, and that he did not want her to think he was abandoning her. He told her it could not work, pointing specifically to the threats, and said they should end things so they could both find happiness somewhere else. He had been trying to have this conversation for some time. The text showed a young man choosing his words with care, aware of the risk involved in saying what he was saying. Mackenzie's messages across the same period reflected a relationship in a very different state. In texts obtained from the trial record, she wrote that she wanted to bang her head on the wall until she was dead. She wrote that she hated herself and that she was at his house breaking down on his floor. She wrote that she was going to kill someone. In a separate exchange, she accused Dom of trying to harm her during a heated argument while she was behind the wheel, and then asked him in the same thread whether he thought she would have had the car running with him in it if she believed he had just tried to hurt her. The framing placed the blame on him while she was the one driving erratically. Videos recovered from Dom's phone during the investigation showed a separate altercation in which she was heard degrading him, threatening him, and damaging his property. In one exchange, she threatened to key his car. In another, she threatened to break a door handle off after he refused to let her inside his home. This was not a single incident. Angelo Russo testified at trial under oath that the couple had gone through repeated cycles of breaking up and getting back together throughout the year of the crash. Dom's mother testified under oath that she had direct personal knowledge of threats being made toward her son, knowledge that came from Dom himself reaching out to her during moments when things escalated. On July 17, 2022, those moments reached a specific and documented peak. Mackenzie was driving Dom on Interstate 71 when an argument broke out between them. A friend who was present during the call with Dom overheard Mackenzie say directly to him, "I will crash this car right now." Dom called his mother after that and asked to be picked up. A friend went and retrieved him. He made it home safely that night. The final texts between them in the days immediately before July 31st were notably different in tone. Short, curt. The threatening language visible in earlier exchanges was absent. On July 30th, Dom texted his father those 3 words already known to this story. The next morning he got into the car. The intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive sits inside a quiet industrial office park in Strongsville, Ohio. It is the kind of area that sees delivery trucks during business hours and almost no one else at any other time. There is no reason to turn onto Progress Drive at 5:30 in the morning unless you have a destination at the end of it. The road runs straight, ends at a building, and offers nothing else. Surveillance cameras in the area captured 2 moments that became central to the prosecution's case. At 5:34 in the morning, a camera recorded Shirilla's 2018 Toyota Camry making a slow, controlled right turn from Pearl Road onto Progress Drive. Less than a minute later, a second camera recorded what happened at the other end of that road. Between those 2 timestamps, nothing interrupted the car's path. The question of whether Shirilla had been on that road before the morning of July 31st was raised during the investigation. GPS data from her phone placed her in the vicinity of that intersection on July 28th, 3 days before the crash. Prosecutor Tim Troop stated in a separate true crime documentary that he believed Mackenzie knew exactly what she was going to do when she turned onto Progress. The lead detective acknowledged in court that cell phone GPS data is approximate and that the placement could not be confirmed with absolute precision to that exact intersection. The judge, however, addressed the route directly in her verdict, describing it as one Shirilla had visited a few days before and one not routinely taken by her. That finding was part of the official court record. Mark Sargent was the prosecution's key physical evidence witness. He is a certified forensic mechanic expert for fire and explosions consultants, and his role at trial was to testify on what the Toyota Camry's event data recorder revealed about the final seconds before impact. The event data recorder, commonly referred to as a black box, captures a fixed window of pre-crash data from a vehicle's onboard systems. What Sargent found in the Camry's recorder was unambiguous. The accelerator pedal was pressed to 100% capacity and held there throughout the entire pre-crash data window. The brake pedal recorded zero input at any point. The vehicle reached 100 miles per hour at impact. The data window captured 5 seconds of full acceleration. When the car was examined for mechanical defects, none were found. His conclusion, stated plainly at trial, was that the car performed exactly as it was directed to perform. The surveillance footage independently corroborated every data point the recorder produced. The controlled turn, the immediate and sustained acceleration, the absence of any deviation from the straight-line path toward the building. Two independent sources, the onboard computer and the external camera, told the same story without contradiction. When first responders arrived at the Plitco building, they found the Toyota Camry with severe damage and full airbag deployments. All 3 occupants were unconscious, not breathing, and trapped inside. Among the details documented at the scene was Shirilla's Prada slipper, which was found pressed against the accelerator. Investigators also recovered psilocybin mushrooms and a digital scale from Shirilla at the scene. Toxicology results confirmed that all 3 occupants had marijuana and THC in their systems at the time of the crash. Shirilla's THC levels were above Ohio's legal limit. The scene was initially classified as a traffic accident. That classification did not survive the review of the recorder data and the surveillance footage together. Once investigators saw the controlled turn, the full throttle sequence, the complete absence of braking, and the route itself, the accident classification was set aside. The defense would later argue at trial that drug use could explain a sudden loss of consciousness at the wheel. The prosecution's response was grounded entirely in what the data showed. A 5-second sustained full throttle sequence with zero brake input is not the output of an unconscious driver. An unconscious foot does not maintain 100% pressure on an accelerator with consistency across 5 recorded seconds. It releases. The data did not show a foot releasing. It showed a foot holding. The investigation did not begin with detectives. It began with a group of friends who walked into the Strongsville Police Department on the night of July 31st and handed over their phones. Dom and Davion's friends had been tracking their location through a phone application called Life 360. The app logged movement data in real time, and what the friends saw on their screens that morning told them what police had not yet confirmed. The data showed the car accelerating toward the Plitco building at over 90 miles per hour with no hard braking registered at any point until the moment of impact. The friends did not wait to be called. They came involuntarily, sat down with an officer, and walked through what the app was showing them. That data, combined with the surveillance footage and the event data recorder findings, gave investigators a picture that did not fit the accident classification the scene had initially received. Tim Troop, an assistant prosecutor with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, was brought in to review the surveillance footage and the recorder data together. He would later say in a documentary interview that when he first saw the footage, his initial thoughts were chilling. What stopped him was not the speed. It was the turn. The controlled, deliberate right turn from Pearl Road onto Progress Drive, executed smoothly before the acceleration began, was the detail that told him this was not a driver who had lost control. That observation reoriented the entire direction of the case. In the weeks and months that followed, detectives built their case through witness interviews. Each person they spoke to added a layer to the pattern. Angelo Russo, Dom's brother, came forward in September 2022 and gave investigators a detailed account of what he had watched unfold between his brother and Mackenzie over the course of the year. He described multiple cycles of the relationship ending and restarting, the escalating conflict he had personally witnessed, and behavior toward Dom that he found consistently troubling. His account was not secondhand. He had been present for enough of it to speak to it directly. Dom's mother provided investigators with what she knew from her son's own communications with her. Without restating what had already been documented in the texts, she confirmed to detectives that she had direct personal knowledge of threats being made and that Dom had reached out to her on more than one occasion when situations with Mackenzie had escalated to a point where he needed help. Deanna Fosnight contacted police on the night of the crash itself, at 9:41 in the evening, before investigators had even fully processed the scene. She identified herself as the mother of David Proctor, a former boyfriend of Mackenzie's who had dated her in 10th and 11th grade. Fosnight told police that she had found that relationship deeply concerning. She described Mackenzie as someone who had been allowed to do whatever she wanted without parental oversight, that her son and Mackenzie had argued constantly, and that she considered the dynamic toxic. She also provided screenshots from Davion's Life 360 account showing the vehicle's final movements, along with information about Mackenzie's recent drug activity documented on social media. Fosnight's son David was later interviewed by investigators as well and independently provided his own account of Mackenzie's behavior and driving habits during the time they were together. Multiple sources in their shared social circle described her as a reckless driver, someone known for road rage and erratic behavior behind the wheel. By November 2022, 3 months after the crash, investigators had assembled everything they needed. On the afternoon of November 4th, the lead detective drove to Mackenzie's home. The encounter was recorded on body camera. The detective approached her calmly. His words were brief and direct. "Hi, Mackenzie, step out for me. I'm the one who's been investigating the crash. You're under arrest for aggravated murder, ×2. As he placed her in handcuffs, Shirilla's immediate concern was her jewelry. Through tears, she asked him to be careful removing the bracelet so it would not break. She was placed in the back of a police vehicle. She did not ask about Dom. She did not ask about Davion. Prosecutors would later describe her behavior in those recorded moments as reflecting a shocking lack of remorse. Less than an hour after the arrest, her father Stephen Shirilla arrived at the Strongsville Police Department. Body camera footage obtained and published in June 2026 captured what followed. Stephen spent several minutes demanding to see his daughter and insisting officers were not permitted to question her. When an officer pointed out that Mackenzie was legally an adult who could speak for herself, Stephen's response was recorded clearly. "Yeah, but she's a dumb 18-year-old. Mackenzie never spoke to police. Not that day, not at any point during the investigation. She was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possession of criminal tools. If you want to be in the room when we walk through the trial, the verdict, and the exact words a judge used to describe what Mackenzie Shirilla did that morning, subscribe to Crime Story Network right now and turn on notifications. What came next in that courtroom is the part of this story most coverage has only scratched the surface of. We're going all the way in. The trial of Mackenzie Shirilla opened on August 7, 2023, in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in Cleveland. She was 19 years old. Her defense team had waived her right to a jury, electing instead for a bench trial in which Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, no family connection to Dominic Russo, would hear the evidence and deliver a verdict alone. Shirilla faced 12 counts. She did not testify. The prosecution's case was built in 3 layers, each one designed to eliminate an alternative explanation for what happened on Progress Drive. The first layer was the physical evidence. The Cuyahoga County Deputy Chief Medical Examiner testified on the cause of death for both Dom and Davion. Mark Sargent's event data recorder findings, established during the investigation, were entered into evidence and testified to at trial, confirming the accelerator was at full capacity with 0 brake application across the entire 4.6 seconds of pre-crash data. No mechanical failure. No defect. The physical record left no room for malfunction as an explanation. The second layer was the relationship. Prosecutors presented the text record, Angelo Russo's testimony, Dom's mother's testimony, and the July 17th witness account, not to recount what had happened between them, but to establish in legal terms that Mackenzie had both motive and a documented prior expression of the exact act she was now charged with committing. Intent, in Ohio law, requires proving that a specific outcome was the purpose of the act. The texts, the pattern, and the prior threat placed that element directly in front of the judge. The third layer was the deliberateness of the crash itself. Prosecutors pointed to the route, the timing, the approach, and the sustained acceleration as evidence of premeditation. Tim Troop addressed this directly in his closing argument. He told the court that Shirilla had controlled the car the whole way, and asked the judge to consider whether it was credible that she had driven the length of Progress Drive asleep at the wheel and that the car had somehow steered itself into the wall. His closing summation was precise. There is no doubt that this happened because of the relationship with Dominic, and the defendant's intent was clearly to end that, and she took everybody that was in the car with her. On Davion, he was blunter still. He told the court that Davion had been friends with Dom and had simply gotten into the wrong car seat. His words, "Davion was just cargo." Defense attorney James McDonnell mounted his challenge on 3 fronts. He argued that the chaos of those final moments meant no one could truly know what had happened inside the vehicle, and that the standard of beyond reasonable doubt had not been met on the specific question of purpose. He raised the possibility that Shirilla had panicked and hit the accelerator when she meant to hit the brake. Accelerator misapplication, as an alternative mechanical explanation for the data. He suggested a passenger could have interfered with the car's controls. And he leaned on the POTS diagnosis, arguing Shirilla had suffered a medically induced loss of consciousness before the acceleration sequence began. His closing stated plainly, "We are really never going to know what happened in that car, much less prove by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that she purposely drove that car." The weakness in the POTS argument was that the defense had not presented a single medical expert to testify about the condition's effects, its likelihood of producing sudden incapacitation, or any clinical analysis of Shirilla's specific symptoms. The diagnosis had been raised but not supported by testimony. The prosecution's counter to the unconsciousness theory was grounded in the data. 4.6 seconds of sustained full throttle with consistent pressure is not the output of an unconscious driver. Consciousness lapses do not produce sustained, uniform force on a pedal. They produce release. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo delivered her verdict. Before she announced her decision, she addressed what the surveillance footage had shown her. This was not reckless driving. This was murder. She described Shirilla's transformation on that footage as going from a responsible driver to literal hell on wheels as she made her way down the street. She noted that Shirilla alone had chosen the route, an obscure road she had visited days before and did not routinely use. She noted that Shirilla alone had chosen the hour, early in the morning when no one would be nearby to witness it or offer assistance. She described her actions as controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. And then she said the line that would define the public understanding of this case. She had a mission, and she executed it with precision. The mission was death. Guilty on all 12 counts. Mackenzie Shirilla broke down in tears as the verdict was read. 1 week later, on August 21, 2023, she stood before the court for sentencing. She read a prepared statement. She told the families of Dom and Davion that she was so deeply sorry and expressed hope that they would one day see she would never have let this happen or done it on purpose. Judge Russo imposed 2 concurrent sentences of 15 years to life, 1 for each victim. Concurrent sentences run simultaneously, meaning Shirilla serves 1 combined term rather than 2 sequential ones. Her first parole hearing is scheduled for October 2037. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley addressed the families after sentencing, telling them that no sentence would undo what they had lost, but expressing hope that Mackenzie would emerge from prison a better person. Dominic's father Frank Russo told reporters that despite his grief, he did not want the rest of Shirilla's life destroyed. He said it was horrible for everybody, that his family had it harder, but that her suffering would not make him feel better. He called her a kid who had done a damn stupid thing. Christine Russo, Dom's older sister, took a different direction. She launched a podcast on YouTube called Big Sister Unhinged, which she described as a platform for truth, sibling grief, and domestic violence awareness in teenagers. She said she started it to make sure Dom's legacy and reputation stayed where they should be, and that if the Shirilla family kept putting out misinformation, she would shut it down. She has not stopped talking since. She said she tends to grieve better in chaos, and the chaos around this case has not stopped. In May 2026, Netflix released a documentary about this case. It is called The Crash. The film reconstructs the events surrounding the fatal collision in Strongsville and presents itself as a deep examination of the volatile relationship at the center of what happened. It includes interviews with families, friends, and investigators. And in its most significant moment, it features Mackenzie Shirilla herself speaking on camera for the first time, in an interview that the filmmakers say took considerable effort to secure. The documentary covered Natalie Shirilla. It covered Steve Shirilla. It covered the crash, the relationship, the investigation, and Mackenzie's life behind bars. It ran its full length and rolled its credits. And in all of that coverage, one member of the Shirilla household was absent from every frame. Her name is Danielle. She will be addressed before this chapter closes. Natalie Shirilla is a registered nurse. That credential is relevant here because of a specific sequence of decisions and a specific moment in a courtroom where those decisions became impossible to defend. Mackenzie was diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome as a teenager. In the Netflix documentary, Natalie explained the condition herself, a blood pressure disorder that can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, and loss of consciousness. Natalie knew about that diagnosis. She was the parent. She was also a medical professional with the clinical training to understand what it meant. She permitted Mackenzie to obtain a driver's license anyway. That was the decision she made, with full knowledge of the diagnosis on record. At trial, that same diagnosis was presented as a possible explanation for what happened on Progress Drive. The defense argued that Potts could have produced a sudden loss of consciousness at the wheel. Natalie was called to testify. Under cross-examination, she was asked directly to account for the medical decision she had personally made. A registered nurse, on the stand, could not provide a coherent answer for why she had authorized a driver's license for a teenager with a documented condition that she herself described as capable of causing blackouts. That moment required no editorial assistance. It rested on its own weight in the record. In the days following the crash, while the Russo family and the Flanagan family were being notified that their sons were gone, Mackenzie and her mother were actively pursuing influencer and modeling opportunities. A fashion company had reached out on Instagram regarding a potential collaboration. Rather than declining, Mackenzie responded to secure the content sponsorship, writing that she had been trying to reach the company for some time and was grateful for the offer. At the sentencing hearing, Natalie addressed the court. She asked for leniency for Mackenzie and referred to Davion Flanagan as a new friend. Judge Russo responded from the bench. What does that mean? His life is worthless. Natalie said no, that they all loved each other and spent every day together. The judge replied, isn't that part of the problem? That they all trusted each other. The families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were in that courtroom when those words were spoken. That is where the record on Natalie Shirilla closes. Steve Shirilla spent years employed as a teacher at Mary Queen of Peace Catholic School in Cleveland. Following the release of the Netflix documentary, Steve was placed on administrative leave from his teaching position. The Catholic Diocese of Cleveland confirmed the investigation, citing allegations circulating on social media involving poor judgment. The diocese subsequently confirmed that Steve Shirilla would not be returning to Mary Queen of Peace School. Steve responded by saying he had no intention of resigning his contract, and that the school and the diocese had shown their true colors in how they handled the situation. What had triggered that sequence was Steve's own on-camera testimony. In the documentary, he stated, I don't have a problem with her smoking dope. If you're going to smoke a drug, that's the one I believe you should take. He later disputed the framing, saying his words had been taken out of context. The record reflects what he said on camera, and the institution where he worked responded to it. Steve then appeared on the True Crime This Week podcast, hosted by James Renner, where he addressed the backlash surrounding the documentary and his suspension. During that appearance, he suggested the Russos were a political family and made a statement directed at the Flanagan family. And I apologize to the Flanagans right now. If it was just Davion in the car, she wouldn't be in jail. It would have never left the juvenile court. The Flanagan family had buried their son. They had created a memorial scholarship fund in his name. Steve Shirilla said their son's death would not have been enough to put Mackenzie in prison. The public response was immediate and documented. That is the last entry in Steve Shirilla's record here. The Netflix documentary interviewed both of Mackenzie's parents across multiple segments. It gave them extended time on camera to present their perspective on their daughter and the case. It did not include Danielle Shirilla in a single frame. Danielle is Mackenzie's younger sister. She was living in the Shirilla home before, during, and after the crash. She has never given a media interview. She has never appeared on camera in connection with this case. She has never issued a public statement. In 4 years of continuous media coverage, with her parents appearing in documentaries, on podcasts, and in news interviews, Danielle has not surfaced once. Not one word attributed to her appears in the public record. The text record reviewed by prosecutors contained messages from Mackenzie to Dom that referenced Danielle. The language Mackenzie used was dismissive. She invoked Danielle's autism not as concern for her sister, but as a way to minimize and set her aside. That material comes from the same evidence record established earlier in this script. Steve and Natalie Shirilla have maintained Mackenzie's innocence and remained publicly vocal throughout the years since the conviction. That public presence has been sustained and consistent. Danielle has been absent from all of it. Psychologists who study families involved in high-profile criminal cases describe self-protective distancing as a response in which a family member withdraws from a public narrative that feels unsafe or damaging to their own psychological stability. It is not the same as denial. It is not indifference. It is a deliberate withdrawal from an environment the individual has assessed as harmful to engage with. It is a protective move, and it is a recognizable one. In a family that has not stopped talking for 4 years, Danielle Shirilla's silence is the most coherent position anyone with that last name has taken. The conviction did not end the legal fight. It opened one. The first appeal came through the standard channel. After the guilty verdict and sentencing, Mackenzie's legal team brought the case to the 8th District Court of Appeals in Cuyahoga County. The grounds were a claimed lack of evidence and alleged errors made by the court during trial. The 8th District Court of Appeals reviewed those arguments and found no merit in any of them. The conviction was upheld in September 2024. Every argument the defense had brought to that court was examined and rejected. The physical record, the surveillance footage, the black box data, and the verdict were allowed to stand exactly as Judge Russo had delivered them. The second attempt went higher. In February 2025, Shirilla's legal team filed for appeal in the Ohio Supreme Court. In April 2025, that court declined to hear the case. It did not issue a ruling on the merits. It simply closed the door. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office issued a statement in response. They were pleased with the Ohio Supreme Court's decision to decline jurisdiction, and they considered the matter resolved. 2 courts had now weighed the conviction, and neither had found reason to disturb it. The state's position was that this case was finished. The third attempt introduced a different kind of argument entirely. Shirilla's new attorneys filed with the Ohio Supreme Court on April 27, 2026. The foundation of the filing rested on 2 positions. The first involved transcript timing. The defense argued that the clock for filing the post-conviction petition should have started later, on the date a separate transcript was filed weeks after the main trial record was submitted to the Court of Appeals, not on the date of the primary record. The second issue was the calendar itself. Ohio law requires post-conviction petitions to be filed within 365 days of the trial transcript being filed with the Court of Appeals. The petition had been submitted on October 24, 2024, 1 day past that deadline. The attorneys argued the miscalculation occurred because 2024 was a leap year and the extra day had not been accounted for in the filing timeline. The 8th District had already addressed this directly in its ruling. Ohio law mandates a 365-day window, not a 1-year calendar anniversary. Equitable tolling does not apply to post-conviction petitions under Ohio statute. The petition was filed on day 366. The court found itself without jurisdiction to consider it on that basis alone. The new defense team also raised a claim of ineffective assistance of counsel. The argument was that Shirilla's original trial attorney failed to retain a medical expert on the POTS diagnosis, failed to formally admit her medical records into evidence, and failed to introduce text messages the defense believed contradicted the prosecution's account of intent. As of June 2026, the Ohio Supreme Court has not yet decided whether it will hear the appeal. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office stated that they remain confident any court that reviews this case will reach the same conclusion every prior court has reached. While the appeals moved through the system, a separate record was accumulating inside the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. Mackenzie Shirilla has received 36 prison conduct reports since her arrival in August 2023. Of those 36 reports, 32 resulted in guilty findings. A September 2024 cell search uncovered 29 bottles of paint, craft supplies, jewelry-making materials, and what staff documented as a large stack of Monopoly money among other unauthorized items. An October 2024 bed search turned up altered state-issued clothing, a fan believed to belong to another inmate, and 4 nude magazine photographs. Shirilla pleaded guilty in that case. A January 2025 search found medication not prescribed to her and a personal photograph that staff recorded as containing evidence of drug use. Shirilla told staff the pills were prenatal vitamins obtained from another person and disputed the characterization of the photograph. In April 2025, records documented that she had conducted over 100 video visits with a person who was not an approved visitor, accessing the system under a false name. In a prison phone call obtained by investigators, Mackenzie told her mother she planned to become a life coach after her release. Natalie told her she would be able to help so many more people because of everything she had been through. Mackenzie Shirilla is 21 years old. Her first parole hearing is scheduled for October 2037. What the physical evidence ultimately proved was not just what happened on Progress Drive, but that a human being had made a decision and carried it through to completion. The relationship record revealed something colder than rage. It revealed a person who had mapped the distance between wanting someone gone and making it happen. What the family record leaves behind is harder to resolve than the legal case. The conviction has been handed down, the appeals have been filed, and the courts have spoken with consistency. But the pattern of conduct that surrounded Mackenzie Shirilla before the crash, and the pattern of behavior that followed it from the people closest to her, will continue to define how this case is understood long after the legal proceedings reach their end. A family that responded to 2 funerals with media strategies, podcast appearances, and on-camera interviews positioning themselves as the injured party has built a public record that cannot be walked back. The courts measure intent and evidence. History measures everything else. What this family chose to do with 4 years of public attention is now as much a part of this story as the black box data and the surveillance footage. It cannot be separated from the case. It is the case, extended forward into every year that follows. The one person in that family who never chose to be part of any of it made the only decision that reflects an honest reckoning with what happened. Dominic Anthony Russo, born September 24, 2001. He was 20 years old. Davion Markel Flanagan, born March 11, 2003. He was 19 years old. The Ohio Supreme Court has not yet ruled on Mackenzie Shirilla's third appeal. When it does, Crime Story Network will cover it with the full record behind us, not the headline version. Every appeal, every prison report, every name that the documentary's left out. If you are not subscribed, subscribe now. Hit the bell. This case is not finished, and neither are we.